All right, girls, I hope you are ready with the book now. So we'll begin with the story The Third Label by Jack Finney. Right? So before we start with this story, I'll just give you the gist of it. Right? This is a story about a man who has a very curious imaginations, right? The whole story revolves around his imaginations, right? From the beginning till the end is everything that he had imagined. Okay, so before you read, there's something given in the book. See, have you ever had any curious experience which others find hard to believe? Think about the answer yourself. Okay, so I'll begin with the story. Please look at it at the book. The presidents of the New York Central and the New Haven and Hartford railroads will swear on a stack of timetables that there are only two. Right? So, in the beginning of the story, the author says that the president of the New York Central and the New Haven and the Hartford railroads will swear on the table, right? Will swear on the table and say that there are only two. But I say that there are three. Because I have been on the third label of the Grand Central Station. Right. So now the narrator talks about the third label of the Grand Central Station. Now just picturize, just imagine that suppose there's an underground station, railway station. So there, right? There the author says that even the president and all the people will swear that there are only two labels, two floors in the Grand Central Station. But the narrator says that there are three labels in the Grand Central Station. All right. Because I have been on the third label of the Grand Central Station. Yes, I have taken the obvious step. The obvious step. Why obvious? Is because nobody says that there are three labels. And only the author here says that there are three labels in the Grand Central Station. And that is why it was an obvious step. I talked to a psychiatric friend of mine, among others, right? Of course, this, when everybody says that there are only two labels and the author, he says that there is a third label also. So it is like kind of bugging, right? And he might have discussed with his friend, along with the other friends, he has discussed the matter with his psychiatric friend. I told him about the third label at the Grand Central Station, and he said it was a waking dream wish fulfillment, right? He might have discussed his matter with the psychiatric friend, and that friend had said that it was just a waking dream wish fulfillment. He said, the psychiatric friend concluded that he was unhappy, the author was unhappy. And that made my wife kind of mad, right? The narrator's wife was very worried about him. But he explained that he meant the modern world is full of insecurity, fear, war, worry, and all the rest of it. And that I just want to escape. Right. And at the end, his psychiatric friend also concluded that this world is full of insecurities. Right. It is practically if we also look around, if we also think that this practical world is what? It is full of insecurity. It is full of fear. There's a war, there is worry, and all the rest of it, all the problems of it. And that is why the psychiatric told the narrator that he just wanted to escape from all of this. So this is somewhat like, the narrator is imaginating the third label. And he felt that third label was a medium of escaping from all these insecurities, right? Somewhat escapism has been told here. Well, who doesn't want to escape? Of course, who doesn't want to escape from the fears, from the war, the insecurities of the life? Everybody wishes to live a life which is very peaceful, which is very like a dreamland. But in reality, there's nothing like that, right? And everybody I know wants to escape. But they don't wander down into any third label at Grand Central Station. But that's the reason, he said, the psychiatrist said, and my friends all agreed also, right? Everything points to it, they claimed. Right? So maybe when the narrator went to talk with his psychiatric friend, went to talk with the other friends, right? Excuse me. They might have agreed to what the psychiatric said. They might have agreed that the narrator is just trying to escape from the realities of life, right? And that even proves with his other works also. Other works like My Stamp Collecting, for example, that's a temporary refuge from reality. The hobbies of collecting stamp here, his friend says that it was a temporary refuge from reality. Well, maybe, but my grandfather didn't need any refuge from reality. Things were pretty nice and peaceful at his time. From all I hear, and he started my collection. It's a nice collection too. Blocks of 4 of practically every US issues, first day covers, and so on. Right. Now here what the narrator is trying to say is, right, when he went and discussed the matter with his friend and with his psychiatric also, his psychiatric along with the other friends agreed that the narrator was just trying to escape from the realities of life, from the insecurities of life. And he has the other ways also, like his stamp collection, right? His stamp collection also, his friend pointed that it was a temporary refuge from reality. But then the narrator says that okay, he agrees that maybe that was a temporary refuse. But what about his grandfather? Because his grandfather also used to collect stamps, right? And things were quite different in his grandfather's days. From all I hear, his grandfather might have told him, and he knew that the days of the grandfather was quite better than his days, right? President Roosevelt collected stamps too. Now, not only his grandfather, but even President Roosevelt used to collect stamps, right? Anyway, here's what happened at Grand Central Station. Now, this is how he says, how he went to the third label is explained here. All right, look at the book. Anyway, here's what happened at Grand Central Station. One night last summer, I walked late at the office. I was in a hurry to get uptown to my apartment, so I decided to take the subway. Subway is underground railway from Grand Central because it's faster than the bus route. Did you understand? Now this is how he's telling, right? How he went to the third label is he explaining. He says that one night he walked very late in the office and he was in a hurry to go back to his apartment. So he decided to take the subway, the railway, right, instead of bus. Now I don't know why this should have happened to me. I'm just an ordinary guy named Charlie, right? You can underline his name is Charlie, 31 years old. And I was wearing a tan gabardine suit. Gabardine means tight-fitting suit, and a straw hat with a fancy band on the hat. I passed a dozen men who looked just like me, and I wasn't trying to escape from anything. Right? Everybody said that he was trying to escape from the realities of life. But he says himself that he was not trying to escape. Right? Because he's an ordinary man, just like the other people. He's wearing a suit, he's wearing a hat, and he passes ordinary people like him in that Grand Central Station also. Right? I just wanted to get home to Lucia, my wife. Okay? I turned into Grand Central from Vanderbilt Avenue and went down the steps to the first label, right? So from Vanderbilt Avenue, he went downstairs to the first label, where you take trains like the 20th century. So in the first label, you get a train, right? A train which moves exactly like the 20th century, the modern day train. Then I walked down another stairs to the second label, where the suburban trains leave from. Right. So in the first label, you'll see the author says that he'll see the modern day train, 20th century modern day train, which moves inside around the cities. And in the second label, the train goes to the suburban places. Right. Ducked into an arched doorway heading for the subway and got lost. Right. So I'll explain it again. From the Vanderbilt Avenue, he went downstairs, the Grand Central Station, right? He went downstairs to the first label. In the first label, there was like the modern day train, 20th century trains. Then he walked downstairs to the second label. In the second label, you'll meet the suburban trains. And then he moved to the subway and then he got lost. He lost the way. That's easy to do. I have been in and out of Grand Central hundreds of times, but I'm always bumping into new doorways and stairs and corridors. Once I got into a tunnel about a mile long and came out in the lobby of the Roosevelt Hotel, right? So here he says, right? This Grand Central Station is like very confusing for him. Hundreds of times he has traveled from the Grand Central Station, but every time he traveled, he bumped into a new doorway. He says once he had gone into a tunnel which was about a mile long, and then he came out into the lobby of the Roosevelt Hotel. Another time, I came up in an office building on 46th Street, 3 blocks away from the Roosevelt Hotel. Right? So, somewhat like underground trains, metro stations, what happens is like when you get down off the train, you take a right stairs, you reach somewhere. If you go from the left side, you reach some other ways. So this is all that, right? Sometimes I think Grand Central is growing like a tree, pushing out new corridors and staircases like roots. There's probably a long tunnel that nobody knows about feeling its way under the city right now on its way to Times Square, and maybe another to Central Park, and maybe because for so many people through the years, Grand Central has been an exit. So here, this line also proves that, Charlie is truly trying to escape from the realities of life. He says that probably there is a long tunnel. Look at the book once again. Probably there is a long tunnel that nobody knows, right? He says that, maybe because for so many people through these years, Grand Central has really been an exit, a way of escape. Maybe that's how the tunnel I got into, the tunnel of the third label, right? But I never told my psychiatric friend about that idea, about going that third label. So moving back, the corridor I was in began angling left. Now, this is how he tells he reached the third label, right? The corridor I was in began angling left and slanting downward, and I thought that was wrong. So he says, first he said that he went to the first label, then moved to the second label, and then, he moved to the left. He reached a corridor, right? The corridor I was in began angling left. First, it went towards the left and slanting downwards, and I thought that was wrong, but I kept on walking. All I could hear was the empty sound of my own footsteps, and I didn't pass a soul. Right? Imagine now. He reached the third label. Right? He not exactly reached. He's reaching the third label. So when he was going towards the third label, he passes the corridor. It was angling left and slanting downwards. Right? First, he thought that he might be in a wrong direction, but he kept on walking. But he says that the place he were at that time was an empty space. He could just hear his own footsteps, and he did not even pass a single person. Then I heard that sort of hollow roar ahead. That means open space and people talking, right? So when he was walking far ahead, he could hear people speaking, right? That tunnel turned sharp left. He was walking through the corridor, and then finally that tunnel turned sharp left. I went down a short flight of stairs. He went downstairs a short flight of stairs and came out on the third label at Grand Central Station. For just a moment, I thought I was back on the second label. But I saw the room was smaller, right? For just a second, he thought that he has jumped into a second label again. But he noticed that in the third label, the room was smaller. There were fewer ticket windows and train gates. And the information booth in the center was wood and old looking, old stylish one, right? And the man in the booth, he wore a green eye shade and long black sleeve protector. The lights were dim and sort of flickering, right? It was like, the light was flickering. Then I saw why that light was flickering. They were open flame gas light, debris kind of, okay? There were, in the third label, there were brass spittoon. Brass spittoon means a vessel to spit, okay, on the floor. And across the station, a glint of light caught my eyes, right? When he reached the third label, he noticed that it was quite different than the first and the second label. Right. He also noticed that there were brass spittoon on the floor, and across the station he saw a glint of light, right? A glint of light caught his eyes, and he saw that a man was pulling out a gold watch from his vest pocket. He snapped open the cover, right? He snapped open the cover, glanced at his watch and frowned, right? He just flipped open the watch. He glanced at the watch and he frowned, right? He was shocked. He wore a derby hat, a round hat, a black 4-button suit with tiny lapels, right? Tiny lapels. And he had a big black handlebar mustache, a big mustache. Then I looked around and saw that everyone in the station was dressed like 1890 something, right? 1990 kind of, 1890 kind of dress. Some like, old dresses. I never saw so many beards, sideburn, the lady's hairstyle, right? And fancy mustaches in my life. A woman walked in through the train gate. She wore a dress with leg of mutton sleeves. Okay, so a woman walked in through the train gate. She wore a dress with leg of mutton sleeves and skirts to the top of her high button shoes, right? So he got a glance of a woman, right, who came out of the train gate. She was wearing a dress with a long leg of mutton sleeves. Mutton sleeves is like tight over here and with a big sleeve, exactly like old dresses, right? Old women dress with the tight kind of things. Imagine, you might have watched Pride and Prejudice or the Titanic itself. Imagine the dresses which the man and the woman wore, right? Imagine that kind of dress. So back of her, out on the track, I caught a glimpse of a locomotive engine. A very small Courier and Ives locomotive with a funnel-shaped stack, and then I knew. Right. So here, before reaching the third label, he has described about how the engine was. In the first label, he said that the train was of 20th century. In the second label, the train moved towards the suburban form. And in the third label, he said that the train was of locomotive engine. Right. So I knew. To make sure, I walked over to a newsboy and glanced at the stack of papers at his feet. Right, to make sure that he's really in the old time, he went to the newsboy. He went there and he looked at the newspaper. It was written, The World. The name of the newspaper was The World. And The World hasn't been published for years now. The lead story said something about President Cleveland. I have found that front page since in the public library files, and it was printed June 11, 1894. So same newspaper he had seen in public library, right? And in that newspaper, the date was June 11, 1894. Okay. I turned towards the ticket windows, knowing that here on the third label at Grand Central, I could buy tickets that would take Lucia and me anywhere in the United States we wanted to go. In the year 1894, and I wanted 2 tickets to Galesburg, Illinois, right? So here, when he saw the newspaper, he saw the date was 11th June 1894. And in the year 1894, comparative to the modern years, we know it's cheaper, right? It's quite cheaper. So he says that he wanted to buy a ticket for Lucia, his wife, and himself. right? Because he knew that at that time he can go anywhere in United States, and he wanted to buy two tickets to Galsburg, Illinois. Okay. Have you ever been there? The narrator asks us. It's a wonderful town. He describes how Galsburg, Illinois was, right? He says that it's a wonderful town, and it still is, with the big old frame houses, huge lawns and tremendous trees whose branches meet overhead and roof the street, right? He says that this Galsburg, Illinois town is a beautiful place, and still it is, with a huge windows, a huge lawn, and the streets are full of big trees, and whose branches like meet and make a roof on the street, right? And in 1894, summer evening were twice as long, and people sat out on their lawns, the man smoking cigars and talking quietly, the women waving palm leaves fan, with the fireflies all around in a peaceful world. Imagine nighttime, the fireflies flying nicely, and the women, they are fanning themselves with the palm leaves, right? In a peaceful world. To be back there with the First World War still 20 years off, and World War II over 40 years in the future. So First World War was over, and Second World War was 40 years in the future, 1894. I wanted 2 tickets for that place, the narrator says. Then as he goes to buy a ticket, the ticket counter clerk, he figured the fare, the price. He glanced at my fancy hat band, but he figured the fare, right? The ticket counter clerk, he looked at the hat of the narrator, but he ignored that, and he said the price. And I had enough for 2 coach ticket one way. Right now, right at that moment in his pocket, he had enough money to buy 2 tickets one way to Galsburg, Illinois. But when I counted out the money and looked up, the clerk was staring at me. He nodded at the bills. He looked at the money, and then he said, "That isn't money, mister. And if you're trying to scheme me, if you're trying to fool me, you won't get very far." And he glanced at the cash drawer beside him, right? The clerk, when Charlie was counting the money, the clerk looked at the money, and the clerk said that is not the money. Because of course, in the olden times, the money was of bigger size than what we have right now. Okay. And then the clerk said that if Charlie is trying to fool him up, he's not going to get very far. Of course, the money was old style bills, half again as big as the money we use nowadays, and of different looking. I turned away and got out from there, because there's nothing nice about the jail even in 1894.